Good morning, Chairman.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Overview and Scrutiny Management Board on this fine June day. I'd like to begin by saying my name's Councillor Robert Parker and I'm the Chair of the Board. That's for outside purposes. Welcome to all members and officers in attendance today. The video feed of the meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website. I'd also like to welcome members of the press and public. Thank you. And as well, the meeting is being streamed in the usual way. Can I remind you all that your comments will be audible and can be reported by the media if you don't turn them off when you think that you have done. Welcome to the following executive councillors who are expected here today, and executive support councillors: Councillor Martin Hill, Leader of the Council; Councillor Richard Butroyd, Executive Councillor for People Management; Councillor Mark Whittington, Executive Support Councillor for Resources, who is attending via Teams, and also Councillor Hilton Spratt, Support Councillor for People Management. I'd also like to welcome Councillor Moran and Councillor Ashley Baxter, who are attending for one particular item, and I've agreed that they will be able to speak on that item. We've also got the corporate leadership team here, members of the corporate leadership team: Debbie Barnes, Chief Executive; Andrew Crookham, Executive Director for Resources. I think Glenn Garrod is with us as Executive Director for Adult Care and Community Wellbeing via Teams, but only for item 7, and Heather Sandy, Executive Director of Children's Services, via Teams for item 7 again. Usual health and safety announcements. There's no fire drill planned for this morning, so in the event of a fire alarm sounding, can we leave the building through the council chamber that is behind everybody, through the doors, and leave the building through the reception area into the front car park. We then need to wait in the car park for further instructions. Can I remind everybody to ensure your mobiles and devices are on silent. Also, when invited to speak, can you please ensure that you switch on your microphone? Otherwise, those attending the meeting via Teams outside of this council chamber and members of the press and public listening to our meeting online won't be able to hear you. Please be aware that you need to speak directly into the microphones to be heard. If you wish to speak during the meeting, can you please raise your hand, and Tom Smith, Councillor Tom Smith, will make a note as Vice Chair. Okay, so moving on to the business on the agenda. If we move to item 1, apologies for absence and replacement members. Tom, do we have any apologies or replacement
Thank
members?
you, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Kendrick and Martin Kyle, and we have Councillor Stokes replacing Councillor Pepper for this meeting only.
That's fine. Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry, Chairman. I'd like to give Hilton Spratt, Councillor Spratt, apologies for this meeting.
Okay, thank you. Item 2 is declaration of the Council's interests. Members of the board are reminded that they only need to declare any relevant interest which have not been declared on their declaration of pecuniary interests form. Do any members wish to declare a new interest now? Yep, Councillor Dilks.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The item regarding Deeping's Leisure Centre, can I declare that it is in my division, the division I represent, I'm proud to say. My kids learned to swim there, so did their kids. And I have supported the community trust in the Deepings that is working to get swimming resumed in Deeping as soon as possible. I am not a member, however, currently of the group, nor am I a trustee or have been a trustee. and I'm advised that I would be able to speak on the item and vote on it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just tell us who the advice was from.
I can see the Chief Executive putting her hand up. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. Okay, so we move to item 3, minutes of the meeting on the 25th of May. This is on the agenda to confirm and sign, for me to sign the minutes from the last meeting of the board on the 25th of May as a correct record. Do I have a proposer and a seconder for the minutes, please?
Quite happy to propose, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Tom. Anybody who was present at the last meeting? Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Okay. We'll now vote on the minutes. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Thank you. Fine. The minutes are agreed. Okay. Announcements by the Chair, Executive Councillors and Chief Officers. My announcements. I'm pleased to report that following a recent election for a new Parent Governor representative, Dr. Emil van der Zee has been elected. Dr. van der Zee has previously been a Parent Governor representative on this board and the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee as well. And I look forward to meeting him, welcoming him to our next meeting in August. I know Emil particularly well because he and I both serve on St Faith's Infants School Governing Board. We have a heavy agenda today. That's getting it in from the start, with 4 pre-decision scrutiny items to be considered. I'll be bringing forward item 9 on the Deeping School Leisure Centre for consideration before item 7. I'd like to remind the officers presenting that report should be taken as read, and therefore you only need to summarise the key points in your report. This will allow more time for members who need it to fully debate each item. Thank you. Okay, can we move on now to Executive Councillor announcements? Are there any Executive Councillor announcements from Councillor Martin Hill or Councillor Richard Boothroyd? That's no to both. Thank you. Chief Officers announcements. Are there any Chief Officer announcements from, first of all, Debbie Barnes, Chief Executive, and secondly, Andrew Crookham, Executive Director for Resources?
Thank you. If I could just let the committee know that you'll obviously be aware we have already had a Children's Services inspection. Our fire and rescue inspection has finished and we are awaiting the findings in that inspection. But what I wanted to just update the committee is that next week Adult Social Care is due to take part in a new assurance framework, so a new framework by the Care Quality Commission. So we'll have inspectors on site as from Monday the 3rd of July for 5 days. Thank you.
Thank you. Andrew.
Nothing from me, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we move now to item 5, consideration of call-ins. Tom, are there any call-ins to consider?
None received.
Okay, thank you. Item 6, council calls for action. Don't have many of them ever, but have we got any this meeting? Council calls for action.
Sorry, none received, Chairman.
Thank you. Right, we'll now move on to item 9 on the agenda. This item is a pre-decision scrutiny prior to a decision by the Executive on Tuesday of next week. So we're required as a scrutiny committee to consider the attached report and to determine in our own minds whether the board supports the recommendation to the Executive as set out in the papers, and agree any additional comments to be passed to the Executive in relation to this item. I'll be attending the Executive on Tuesday, so if there's points that we want to make as a result of our discussion and debate, then they'll be captured by Democratic Services officers, and I will pass them on to the Executive as part of our report. So, the report will be presented by Jane Sowerby Warrington, Assistant Director, Corporate Property. Jane.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. This is my first executive scrutiny. So,
Welcome.
yeah, thank you. Happy to be here presenting this item. I would like to give just a brief overview and summary of the report, if I may, Chair, and then obviously move on to questions, etc. So in terms of the deepings, Lincolnshire County Council granted a tenancy at will to the Anthem Trust as a precursor to a 125-year academy lease. And just to say, the academy lease based on the 125-year approach is the standard approach that local authorities grant to academies. In terms of the leisure centre itself, the leisure centre is located within the school site, and it forms quite a large part of the overall school site. There is a map in Appendix A in terms of the report. So historically, the leisure centre has been operated by South Kesteven District Council, I think since 1974, but in 2021, South Kesteven ceased to operate the leisure centre. And in 2022, South Kesteven made the decision to hand the property back to Lincolnshire County Council. So we took the responsibility back of the property in January 2023. Since January 2023, officers within corporate property and across the organisation have been looking at options in order to determine the future direction of travel for the leisure centre property. This direction of travel is really important to ensure that the 125-year lease is signed and the council match their statutory obligation to do this. It's also important to ensure that the leisure centre property doesn't come into further decline as time goes on. So the proposals around the direction of travel were based on 3 key principles. The first one being that it gives us the ability to sign the 125-year Academy Trust or Academy lease with the Academy Trust. The second principle is based around Lincolnshire County Council extinguishing all liabilities and responsibilities for the leisure centre. And thirdly, any preferred option must be mutually agreed by LCC and the Academy Trust. So throughout these options, 6 options were put forward and 4 were discounted because they didn't meet the criteria that I've just run through. Those discounted options can be found in section 2.1 of the report. So the preferred option is to seek expressions of interest to dispose of the leisure centre building and then seek to sign the 125-year lease. We believe that this option will give the market the opportunity to come forward with a viable and sustainable business case with an opportunity to reopen and rerun the leisure centre property. It will mean that the council, in terms of Lincolnshire County Council, will walk away with no liabilities or ongoing responsibilities for the site, and the 125-year lease can be signed. We do appreciate that this option will need agreement from the DFE, and approval will therefore be required to this option. There is an opportunity, if we so wish, to provide a grant to any successful third party. This will be subject to negotiations and also subject to a rigorous financial business case by an experienced and competent third party. We do recognise that the freehold sale of the building and the forthcoming operation of the leisure centre will mean that the County Council will lose an element of control in terms of the operation of the building in future. So should this preferred option not come to fruition, the next preferred option therefore would be demolition of the site. We believe that demolition would give a cleared site, it would remove liabilities and responsibilities from the County Council, and would also grant the ability to grant the 125-year lease to the Academy Trust. Again, that is a statutory obligation of the Council. For this option, no DFE approval would be needed, and of course there would be a capital outlay in terms of the demolition of the property, which we do estimate to be in the region of £1.4 million. Thank you, Chair. I think that was the brief overview and summary of the report.
Fine. So we start the debate.
Very happy to. And first thing I would want to say is I would want to say thank you for the paper. Thank you for recognising the value of, you know, the potential value of the building and the need for swimming and other leisure activities in my community. I fully appreciate, of course, that the county council are not providers of leisure centres, but there has been, you know, up to circa 2014, there was a grant from the county council that assisted with the running of that centre, and I think it was £124,000 a year that was withdrawn for whatever reason, you know, some years ago. Some would argue that the county, you know, still has a responsibility. Clearly, they don't in providing that grant. I also welcome. I just think it would be an act of vandalism to demolish the building, particularly at the cost of to this council, without exploring all viable possibilities to actually give it a life that I understand the County Council survey has said is in the building, that the building has a life of at least 25 years. And it just seems sensible to look at the options that are in the paper to give my community and the residents, the catchment area is approximately 18 to 20,000 people who've had that facility for almost 50 years, to give them a chance of returning swimming and other leisure activities to that cohort of people at the earliest opportunity. So I thank members for bringing the paper, and I will be supporting it, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we move on to members of this committee, I'd like to first of all ask Councillor Virginia Moran, local member for South Coast Stephen District Council for the Market Deepings and West, and then Ashley Baxter, who, as you all know, is a member of this council. So, Virginia.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Parker said, my name is Virginia Moran. I am a South Coast Stephen District Councillor, just starting my second term with SKDC. With my other hat on, I am also chair of the Deepings Leisure Centre Community Group, which was formed shortly after SKDC closed the centre. Briefly on the history of what's gone on with the leisure centre. My first 4 years as an SKDC councillor seemed to consist of 90% of my time trying to work out what SKDC were doing about our leisure centre. Myself and Councillor Baxter and Councillor Dilks fought every decision at every stage, all during those 4 years, from getting them to complete their promise of initially a new leisure centre, and then the downgrading of that, and then the downgrading to doing some repairs, and then finally, after us having years and years of leaking roofs, lifts that didn't work, no repairs done on the place, they finally said, oh, we found a little piece of wood in the water, so the roof's obviously about to cave in, so we'll close it. I'm happy to say that it's a year now since they actually closed it, and we've still got a roof, and it's still no different to what it was before. I actually went round the centre shortly after it closed, and the centre looked exactly the same as it had done for the previous 10 years. Nothing was any different. We'd been led to believe it was Armageddon in there. When I went round with Councillor Boothroyd, when the keys were handed over, the wanton vandalism that had taken place in that building was breathtaking. I have no idea what went on. I still don't know to this day. I can't find out what on earth happened. It wasn't the rain that took away the made-to-measure steps into the pool. A local scrap dealer was detailed off to take those away and dispose of them. Happily he didn't. He rang us up and said, would you like me to keep them for you? And we said, yes, please. So moving on to the Deepings Leisure Centre Community Group. In the course of all our efforts, including a petition that we put up, which was signed by almost 10,000 people, the canvassing we've done of people, local residents, about what their requirements were for the leisure centre, we'd got to know quite a number of people who obviously had a massive amount of experience within the leisure centre industry. So in January, we formed the group with the view to actually look whether how much money was actually needed in order for us to get the centre up and running again. Because at the time that it closed, for all we knew, this council just wanted it demolished and out the way and hand it over to the school with no idea. So we were absolutely overjoyed that demolition was deemed to be a last resort. And we are incredibly appreciative of the support that we've received, particularly from Councillor Boothroyd, but from Lincolnshire as a whole, that you're prepared to look at giving back to the Deepings services that we desperately need. The effect on the local community has been brutal, really brutal. We have children now who have never had a swimming lesson. The schools have really struggled to provide lessons for children because they have to bus them there. So there's additional expense. That expense has gone on to the parents. Not everybody can afford it. Also, Stamford and Bourne are full already. So trying to cram in another 1,000 school children from the Deepings for swimming lessons is proving a real problem for them.
Sorry to interrupt. Would you mind moving towards your conclusion, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'm here to say that the people of the Deepings, both Market Deeping and Deeping St James, and the surrounding villages, all of whom mourn the loss of the leisure centre, would be incredibly grateful if you would accept the proposal that's in the paper today. We ourselves as a group will be putting forward a bid. We welcome bids from anybody else that's interested in doing it, because at the end of the day, we want our leisure centre back. We don't mind who runs it. We appreciate that the council is not going to, because it's not on your list of to-do list. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Ashley.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I'm a member of this council, a member of SKDC, but also a member of the working party. It's a working party towards a potential bid to rescue the leisure centre, of which today is a very important day in terms of your decision, councillors, as to whether to reopen to allow the centre to be reopened, or whether to demolish it. And obviously I'm delighted that the proposal is that we look to see if it can be saved. I'm also the parent of a swimmer, and currently as a father I'm driving all over the place to get my swimming daughter to a swimming pool. By the time this decision reaches its conclusion of the pool being open or not, my daughter will not be she will have moved on to different things. So the school need a sports hall. They're currently paying a large amount of money for a temporary sports hall, and that is temporary. The schools around need swimming lessons. The children, as Councillor Moran said, the school, the people of the Deepings need a place to swim. We know that there's a health and well-being crisis, almost a pandemic of ill health across the country, and swimming pools and leisure centres are a way to address it. So please, please, regardless of how we got to this point, please give the Deepings the opportunity to reopen that leisure centre, to repair and reopen it, because it is so desperately needed. And once, if it were demolished, it would be gone forever, and we would face another problem of a school having to find a new sports hall. It wouldn't make any sense at all to close it when it structurally has been proven that it can be reopened. And finally, as Councillor Moran said, I've got no desire to spend the rest of my life running a leisure centre. I don't think many of the people involved in it have, but we do need a leisure centre. So people in the Deepings can run a leisure centre if required. Perfectly happy for other organisations to run it, as long as it remains accessible to people who are vulnerable and on low incomes and so on. So that's all I need to say. Thank you, Chair.
Fine. Thank you, Ashley. Councillor Hill.
Thank you for that. I mean, I'll let Councillor Pedroy talk about if he wants to talk about the detail. I just wanted to just talk about the complications of this, because I think we'd be delighted actually if we could just hand over this building to a third party and let them run it and get on with it. But I do stress, just remind councillors that the issue is, as Jane said, the issue must be for us that we cannot be actually held eternally for future liabilities should they happen. So that is very much a red line for us. The complications are, of course, because of the academy legislation. Councillor Dilks mentioned the fact that we stopped giving money some years ago. Well, the reason we did that because the Deepings became an academy school, and that actually broke that agreement. There was no need then for us, or responsibility for us, to carry on paying that money, because that was part of when the school was under the county council umbrella. So that's why that stopped then, and you and others here will remember the debates we had when academies first came in, and I think our position was, and Councillor Bradwell's, and I think yours, to be honest, Chairman, was that although we understood the principle behind it, the way it had been set up was particularly unfair to councils, because effectively, if a school wishes to become, and it's still the case now, become an academy, all the assets are handed over to the school, lock on stock and barrel, as long as they ask for it. And the complication we have with the Deepings is the Deeping school said, thank you very much, we'll have all the buildings that the council had repaired very well over the years and borrowed money to repair it, but frankly we don't want the leisure centre because we see there could be a problem in future. And the academy legislation means, and I think Jane referred to it, that we will need the permission of the DFE, we will need the agreement of the academy, of the trust that runs the school, and of course we will need the support of South Kettering District Council. I just leave it at support. I won't say what sort of support, who actually are responsible for leisure facilities in the Deepings and the rest of their district. So it would be lovely to just be able to say, let's hand it over. And I've had conversations with, obviously visited the site, and I think the description Ashley Baxter gave was a fair description. Obviously it is deteriorating as we speak because the roof continues to leak. I've had meetings, discussions with the local MP, John Hayes. So we're hopeful, that I think the best case scenario when we get to the end of this is that we will be able to say that the Deepings will carry on and somebody will take it on. And I think it's not just the repairing, it's the ongoing sustainability of a leisure centre. As we know, they all cost a lot of money these days to run. But that's what our hope is, that we will get to that stage. I think there has to be a timescale on all of this because it does need bringing to a head. So I think we're giving people enough time to find alternatives, find supporting partners to help run the leisure centre or what have you. But at the end of the day, if that is not possible, regrettably, we will have to demolish it. And then, of course, the school will say, thank you very much, we'll have the site, and they'll then take it on because they're then, all the liabilities are removed from their remit. So it's quite a very complicated situation, but I thank you for the words of support. And let's all hope that we can get to a stage where we can do that. But it will require the support and will require someone to come forward to stand behind the leisure centre in the event of things going wrong in a few years' time. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Richard, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Chairman. I think most things have been said, and I'm keen to hear the opinions and the thoughts of the Scrutiny Committee. We've always been open and honest, I think, around the Deepings as a county council. We've always wanted to find a way to keep the Deepings open for the people of the surrounding area. But obviously we do have, as Jane mentioned, we do have statutory duties that we have to fulfil. And we're just trying to find a way through this to keep the leisure centre open, run by a third party. Hopefully we'll get to that. And I don't think there's too much more. And hopefully the DFE will support this decision. I mean, I think out of all the things that are key here, that is the big key decision that we're able to redline the Deepings Leisure Centre, take that out of the lease for the school, and provide that to a third party to run and own. So they're the key things. Sir John Hayes is working very hard with ourselves to try and make that happen as well. And I think that today is the first stage of hopefully getting to a successful conclusion that the Deepings have a leisure centre back. Thank you.
Thank you. Overview and scrutiny management committee members. Who wants to speak? Yep, Hugo.
Morning, Chairman. So, I mean, it's an interesting report and it's an interesting sort of concept, really. Reality is, I'm a big believer that every child should be given the opportunity to learn to swim. It'll stop half the disasters of kids jumping into water on a hot day and then can't swim and all the other issues. We're a modern, developed world, and so in theory we should have opportunities to swim. The issue really here is that this has sort of been going on for a long time, and in effect no one's invested in the site, which has allowed it to become where it's now and what we're debating about. I think it would have been nice to have seen in the paper, I mean, you've mentioned £2 million to demolish it. I mean, it'd be nice to have seen either a firmer option on that and a firmer option of a revamp to have actually sort of so that we really half know what the really picture is. I've Googled it. On Google it looks quite good, but the problem is Google doesn't only gives you what you want to see. But the pool is straight, long, and it's obviously great swimming potentially. However, as a council, Lincolnshire County Council, our job is not to fund leisure centres. That is not our remit. I live near Market Raisin, and we've just had a new leisure centre built, but without a swimming pool, and everybody wanted a swimming pool. But, you know, where do we then start and stop from investing into leisure complexes that isn't our remit? Having gone through the paper, I support the paper. I think it's fair. It gives people an opportunity to come forward and actually make an offer, make a bid. My view is, though, what it doesn't also put in the paper is an end date. And actually, this cannot keep dragging on. And many a times I sit in the council and people come forward, the public come forward with an aspiration to do something. It's very hard to deliver on aspirations, especially on this size. So I think that, yes, give you the people the opportunity, but I think we have to actually say, look, whether it's 6 months or 9 months, I certainly wouldn't go beyond next year and the next financial year and drag it out. I think my definite recommendation is put an end date on it, and everyone then knows where and when they need to actually register the interest or get on. 9 months gives plenty of time, in my eyes, to sort out this. It's been going on quite long enough, so those that are interested should have an idea of what they would like to do. And I think that my recommendation would be put an end date on, give them an opportunity. If nothing comes forward, then we have to get on and demolish this building. The costs, and that's where the cost comes in. because often we look at these things, revamp can often be half-hearted and doesn't actually meet the needs, and a new build is what is often needed, and it does cost more, but actually the running costs will be a lot cheaper in the long run. So I think it's time to make this decision, and it's time to put an end date on this and the opportunity that is given to those that want to take it on. And if they don't come forward, then we get on and we move on. And that doesn't mean to say that the college or the academy can't look and go after its own funding and look at it as an option under its own right, because it will have the land and it'll be cleared, but that's down to them then. And as we've said, academies do their own thing and they're not attached to us. We've handed over a lot of assets in the time, so it's time to move on. Draw a date and let's move on with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugo. Okay, other members of Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. Yeah, Mike.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to say that I'm going to support these proposals. I think the County Council's being very fair to the Deepins with putting these proposals forward to give the Deepins the opportunity to find a third party that will be able to operate these leisure facilities and keep those facilities available in the Deepins. I mean, I do think it's important that children get swimming lessons as quickly as possible, and obviously as near as possible to the schools that they're educated in. So I can see the need for that here, but again, it's not the County Council's responsibility to provide those facilities. So disposing of the freehold to a third-party operator to run the site seems a really good way to go, and hopefully we can get somebody or a group to come forward to do just that. But again, listening to Hugo, I agree that we do need to try and put an end date on this. It can't go on, and 9 months would seem reasonable. I think from what has been said that probably there's a group already looking at ways at which they can move forward with this. So hopefully 9 months would be enough time to enable them to come up with some sort of conclusion and proposals. So I'm going to support the paper. Unfortunately, if we can't find anybody to take over the freehold and run the facility, I think we have got to get on and demolish it. It can't go on and on. So thank you, Chairman. That's my thoughts on the matter.
Thank you, Mike. Jackie Brockwell.
Thanks ever so much, Chairman. I think everybody's going to support this. I mean, it's a really good way forward. I was just wondering, just a point of clarification, if you could, please. We're talking about disposing of the land to the Academy and the freehold and all the rest of it. Does that mean give or sell, or what? It means give. Okay, thank you.
Anybody in the know like to pick that part up?
It is, as I've said in one of my speech, they can demand, if they say they want it, we have to hand it over. Simple as that, free of charge.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a 125-year lease, and we have no choice. It's under the Academy legislation that it must be passported across unless they refuse.
Right. Anybody else who's not had the chance to speak? No? Okay.
Councillor Dilks, Chairman.
Sorry?
Councillor Dilks wants to speak.
Very briefly.
Yeah, thanks for just allowing me to come out and say thank you, and thanks for the contributions from Councillor Hill and other members, really welcomed. You know, I think we all want to be sensible, and this is a sensible, pragmatic way forward, I think, and I think it is in the interests of the County Council, you know, what is being suggested, and that has to be a win as well. Can I just say, though, I really welcome what Councillor Marfleet says about an end date. I think, you know, nobody wants this to drag on any further than is necessary, and I would welcome whatever end date that the board thinks is appropriate to recommend to the executive. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Phil. Richard, you want to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. It's just we're talking about 9 months, which sat here does seem a reasonable amount of time. But what I'd like to do is take that away, discuss that with property, and see, because if we're talking about demolition or something like that, we've got to tie that in with the school. We've got to plan that. There's only certain times we can do them works. Equally, if we're going out to third parties, we've got to build out what that case is going to be. We've got an idea. We've been discussing what the criteria would be for a third party. But if that takes us 4 months to do, you know, because this is a county council we're talking about, you know, things don't always go as quickly as we'd like them to. I'm just conscious that if we set a 9-month date on that, I'd like to come back and say, look, this is what we're proposing around this, just so we don't tie ourselves into a deadline that we can't meet. That was all. But I totally take on board and something that me and Councillor Hill have discussed about having a definite date. We just need to work out what is a reasonable amount of time to get to that. That's all. Thank you.
Seems reasonable, but this issue is in the hands of Overview and Scrutiny Committee at the moment, and we'd like to know a stop date when you can report back, even if it's only, excuse me, an update. So I think that we would, what I would like is to set a date of 9 months, either to tell us the outcome or to tell us where we are at the moment.
Oh yeah, definitely. We'll be able to update, I think, long before then. And if we can't meet the 9 months date, we'll obviously be setting out reasons that why we can't do that. So I just didn't want to set a date of 9 months and us not be able to meet that. That was all. So I just.
And by the same token, Richard, I don't want this to disappear into the sunset.
Oh, it won't. I think and
that's why I'm asking members to agree, as part of the recommendation, that we either get a full report back or an update in 9 months. Okay. So, did you want to speak, Martin?
Yeah, just on that. I mean, taking a point, because this is very complicated, and it won't be. I think, as Richard has said, the DFE can take a long time to come to take ages. So, I think in my conversations with Sir John Hayes, I think one of the jobs he committed to do was get an early decision. I mean, I think, frankly, because the building, and it is, as Councillor Miranda said, a lot of it's in good shape. It's leaking all the time. The roof's still leaking. The equipment, the swimming equipment, is basically rusting and rotting. So, I think, you know, to be blunt, conversations that we've had with Councillor Bertroyd is that the deadline, in my head, it is the demolition, if all else fails, which hopefully it won't, will be in the summer term of 2024. So that gives all of us a big challenge to get everything lined up, because we can't let it, and I think the summer holidays is the only sort of window of opportunity for these things to be done. So to me, that would seem to be the rest of this year would be. We hopefully by the end of the year we have got a way forward, or we haven't. So that's very challenging for all of us, but I think that's in my head. We can't just let the building sit there, rotting, basically falling apart, which is what will happen.
One other point, you've mentioned Sir John Hayes a few times, and he's gone away to do things. Can you give us any indication as to whether or not central government funding is in any way a possibility?
Well, I mean, I don't want to get too much into the data. I mean, obviously he can't, I mean, until the executive makes their decision, next on Tuesday, obviously then I think there's a hope that interested parties, including Sir John, will be able to get together. I think he's hoping to convene a meeting later next month to get the ball rolling. But he's got various, I understand there is some grant money and, you know, from various, not necessarily from government, from government quangos or government ages. So that there might be money available, but that's another one of his. He's trying to, and I think the locals in the Deepings know more about that than I do, but I understand he is trying to source funding to do that, and we'll see where we get to with that. So I think all of us have got, you know, quite an urgent job to do, and we need to try and move along as quickly as possible.
Okay, fine. We seem to have had a good debate on that. I think everybody's had the chance to speak. Okay, so if we look at page 85, this particular, the recommendations are too long for me to read out because there are six of them in total. But if you have a look at page 85 and 86, then that's what I'm proposing on behalf of the Scrutiny Committee, that we do, that the executive does do these things.
Comments from the board.
Yeah, the comments from the board will be passed on, of course. There's been plenty of them, so thank you. So if we look at 85 and 86, then can we agree the course of action that's been proposed? Those in favour? Okay, those against? None. Anybody abstaining? No? Unanimous then. Thank you. Thanks for everybody's attendance on this. It's been a good debate, and I'm sure that I will do my best to convey to the executive on Tuesday the feeling of the members. Okay. So we'll just have a moment's break while people leave. But the next item on the agenda is what should have been the case 7 Corporate Plan Success Framework 2022, which is on page 11. Yeah. So, thank you for that. So we've got the Corporate Plan Success Framework, actions required. Consider the attached report and determine whether the board supports the recommendations. And Caroline Smith, sorry. Right, following up.
Jackson's going to present reports.
Sorry, who is?
Caroline Jackson.
Fine, Caroline, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, the report that we have today is the end of Q4, so that's March 2023, of the Corporate Plan Success Framework. We also have the one measure reported today that OSMB has a specific responsibility for, which is the Vinci Facilities Partnership Limited Contract. So for the fourth quarter, we've seen a small decline to 92.7%, where the contractor has had 4 reactive tasks not completed within timescale and 1 missed planned task. But again, that performance is broadly in line with what we've seen previously. In terms of the corporate plan, so we have 35 activities that we're reporting in Q4, and all of those activities are progressing as planned. Full details of all of the activities, along with the narratives, are within the pack. In terms of the key performance indicators, I'll summarise. So there are 31 KPIs that we report against a target in this report. 71% of those are either exceeding or achieving their target. This is a small reduction from Q3. However, we are reporting 7 more measures in Q4. The 5 KPIs that are exceeding their target, and they're represented by the gold star, 3 of these were exceeding in Q3. So you'll recall 2 of those were around waste and 1 around customer levels of satisfaction. The 2 new measures in Q4 that weren't reported as exceeding in Q3 are the number of children in care per 10,000 population. You'll remember that we adjusted the target in year for this measure due to obviously nationally seeing an increase in the number of children coming into care. But we are still showing really strong performance, and a recent Ofsted inspection of children's services stated that when children come into care, this is because it's in their best interest to do so, and most admissions to care are planned. So strong performance in that measure. And the second measure that's newly reported in Q4 is due to the final published release of academic achievement data. So although children and young people are sitting their examinations now, we actually only have that final release of last year's, so 2022's summer academic achievement data now. So the measure that was exceeding its target is the percentage of pupils achieving 5 or above in their English and Maths GCSEs. So this exceeded the target that was set. 17 measures in the report are achieving their target. Again, a very positive picture in a very challenging year. They're all again detailed in the report. The differences from quarter 3 is that we now have measures that we are reporting this quarter around road maintenance. Again, all of these are achieving their target. And the 2 measures around early years entitlement, so for 2-year-olds and 3- and 4-year-olds, are both also achieving in this report. In terms of contextual measures, so those where we don't set a target but the Executive Director gives a RAG rating, all of those again are performing within tolerance, so are RAG rated green. Just as an update to committee, last time we talked around a measure 28, which is around the percentage of deaths of those caused age 30 plus associated with air pollution. We have updated with 2021 data. Last time we only had 2020. We'll see that there has been a small increase between years, but are still below national levels. In terms of those measures not achieving their target, there are 6 measures that weren't achieving their target in quarter 3 and are now also not achieving in quarter 4. Again, you'll be familiar with those around waste, the good and outstanding schools, our sickness absence levels and our contacts resolved at early resolution. All measures I know we've discussed previously. In terms of the 3 new measures that we're reporting in quarter 4 that aren't achieving their target, 2 of those relate to the good development in the early years. So again, academic achievement data that is newly released. So it's those achieving good level of development and also the gap in achievement between free school meals children and non-free school meals. As we probably anticipated, these measures were impacted by COVID and the closure of nursery provision, as well as a new assessment framework in 2021 in the early years, which we often see when an assessment framework changes, that the achievement level drops. And the final measure, again, a further academic achievement measure that hasn't achieved its target, is around the percentage of pupils reaching the expected standard in reading, writing and maths in Key Stage 2. Again, those early years, as in the education years, we're seeing an impact of the COVID and obviously Key Stage 2 being at the end of primary school, obviously anticipated that we potentially would have seen that impact. And we're not only seeing it in Lincolnshire, but also nationally. Just finally, to also bring to your attention that in Appendix B, we obviously have set the framework for 23-24 for the corporate plan, and all of the KPIs and activities are listed in there with targets for agreement. And all of those targets have received portfolio holder approval in terms of the relevant services. We've also outlined the measure to be reported into OSMB next year around capital receipts. So that's the summary. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? There's quite a lot there for Jackie.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for a very interesting report. I have 2 questions, if I may, please. One is on page 20. And you're talking about recycling. It's got a red cross against the recycling rate. And I'm aware of the new national formula. And I'm also aware that there has been discussion nationally about asking people to recycle a little less in order to decrease the contamination. It's something that fascinates me, and I'm not sure about a way forward, because in my own life I'm a bit of a passionate recycler. I even tear the windows out of the envelopes, you know. But I find that when people visit me, my bins are always contaminated, even though they're clearly marked. Now, I'll pull it out and put it right because it irritates me. But the thing is, I can never understand why intelligent people can't see when it says cardboard and paper only, they think it's okay to put a plastic bag in there. It is astonishing. It's almost as if there's a blindness. And I know that it just isn't me, because we've had some amusing conversations around this. That says put that in there, and you've just put something entirely different. What is in your mind that you think that's okay to do? And I'm interested to know what educative resources we've got available to try and change that? Because I'm pretty certain it's widespread. So that would be my first question about contamination, which damages our recycling rate. And my second question is page 27. It talks about 92% of children in Lincolnshire taking up their 3- and 4-year-old universal entitlement, which is great. But I'm curious to know why the other 8% doesn't. Okay, so 2 questions there. Thank you very much, Chairman.
I believe Mike is on the Teams to answer the waste question.
Okay, Mike, from Teams.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, fine.
Yes, thank you. Jess, just in the response to the question, I do have a certain amount of sympathy for the public in that the national message doesn't always reflect the local position, and that each authority has different recycling regimes. And I think it's something that the government are trying to address and create more consistency in the approach to recycling, which a lot of this is embedded in the new Environment Act. So there is a lot of sympathy for the public, and we do help and try and help the public where we see contamination issues. We have good contacts with the district councils who are responsible for the collection, and we work closely with the districts to try and educate the public and tell them why things might be slightly going awry. So there is various campaigns. We have a Right Thing, Right Bin campaign, which we periodically promote, and we have a website which we're looking to develop even further. But something which we're doing a bit more hands-on is going around to schools, and our performance team are going around and educating junior schools to start with, and just giving information on what is the best way to recycle and what the different issues are, just to educate, because that's the real the kind of opportunity that I think we've missed in the past. So I think this is something that we're really focusing on, because some people find it very difficult to change their mindset. Some people of a certain age, but younger people are a very good resource at kind of changing this bit of a cultural issue. So I hope that's answered the question, Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Jackie.
Yeah, very good.
Fine. Anybody else want to ask a question?
So, Chairman, could I have the answer to my second question about the percentage uptake of the provision for the 3- and 4-year-olds, please?
Is that
Yeah.
Caroline?
I think Martin Smith's online as well.
Okay. So who's going to answer it?
Sorry, I think Martin Smith's online to answer it.
Fine.
Yeah.
Morning. Morning, Chair. Can you hear me?
Fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockway. Morning to the scrutiny panel. Just wanted to answer your question around the early years setting and the level of engagement. So just to give you some reassurance really around the promotion activity and the work that's going on via our children's centres and the early years partnership. So recently, since the pandemic, we've increased the number of transition events and parent partnership events, which has seen an increase of 177 additional arrivals within early years settings. We've also made sure that we've highlighted through all of our partnership working through schools and other early years settings and partner agencies, raising awareness of the Family Services Directory and the local offer that's available to those youngsters, to really try and make sure that that message is highlighted and that offer is clear to all communities and families and young people. We've also increased the number of engagement events across holiday periods when families and children are likely to be available to experience different settings. And we've seen an increase of nearly 5% in that level of engagement. More longer term, we will also see the embedding and the continuation of family hubs, which really brings together the importance of that early years experience 0 to 5 through the different partners, and there will be a lot more communication and promotion of that as those settings open over the next few months. So I hope that gives you some level of reassurance around the activity to try and maximise that engagement.
Yeah, Chairman, could I just thank you for that, but that is very reassuring, but I'm wondering, is there any data to explain why 8% of the children don't engage? Is that in any way a red flag? Is that something we should be worried about? 8% is quite a few children. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brockway. So I think within that 8%, there's limited data to understand why there isn't engagement. Some of it's around parental choice and desire around how they would like to engage with services. Some of it will be around awareness and accessibility, but certainly we would always want to endeavour to increase that level of participation. And we feel really strongly that's about raising awareness, promotion, and clarifying the benefits of being able to engage in that early education support offer.
Not sure who's going to pick it up, but at the top of page 20, there's a 9 did not achieve the ambitions. Some of them seem to be significant, and I'm just interested from an overall point of view, which ones are causing the most concern. And I don't know who's going to answer it. Okay.
I'm happy to come in terms of the good and outstanding schools measures are the two measures we've obviously discussed and debated previously. In the framework for next year, you'll see we're actually going to make those contextual measures because of the length of time it takes in terms of a re-inspection of a school. Then those measures obviously do take quite a long time potentially to move. The majority of obviously of our schools are academies as well, and we've had a long discussion around the support that we have for academies. So in terms of the good and outstanding schools, we obviously have discussed at length previously, obviously the support we're giving particularly to maintain schools as well. We've talked about some of the academic achievement ones. I think, you know, we are sort of entering a new period in terms of this summer where some of those young people that are now sitting assessments this summer have had a year, 18 months of education, whereas previously, obviously, we've seen long periods of time where those children and young people were out of school. So perhaps the expectation that some of those were targets that were originally set were quite challenging. We've also covered off quite a number of the waste measures, and we know that we want to see them as a combined group, and they're in the report as a combined group. Obviously, this is just kind of a fairly, just a full list really. In terms of sickness absence, although this is still not achieving its target, we are seeing improvements in our sickness absence month on month. I think we're now in a 12-month consecutive month where we've actually seen sickness absence reduce. So again, although we've not achieved our target, we are getting much closer to that in terms of our sickness absence. And the early resolution measure, again, we've kind of changed that for next year in terms of actually the period that we've actually got in terms of the way we report this measure around early resolution is incredibly small, and we would want to ensure that we do resolve those queries and complaints early, but give ourselves time so we're not kind of almost shooting ourselves in the foot with some of the definition around early resolution. So I think in terms of, to answer your question about what we're concerned about, I think we've got an explanation there around some of the areas we're very familiar with, and obviously the academic ones are new into reporting this time.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? No? Yeah, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. It was just coming back to one of Councillor Brockway's points on waste. And contamination, really. And I think one of the words I'm not sure whether she actually used the word blind, but I was just wondering, with the contamination and bins, what support do we give to people that are visually impaired or are blind, actually, to go around that, you know, to put the right thing in the right bin, etc. Do we have a system? Do we even think about it? I just wondered whether, I'm not saying that the contamination is anything to do with that, but just that thought that popped into my head, which is, you know, how do people with disabilities like that actually get round the system that we've put in place? That was sort of my question.
Fair question. A lot of people there to answer it.
Is it Mike? Can you get Mike
Okay.
If I can answer, can I answer that, Chairman? Thank you. Yes, I think it's something that we're very sympathetic towards, and where we have contact made by particularly disenfranchised groups or people with disabilities, then we do try and talk to them and try and educate them in how to address these particular issues. It's very difficult, though, if it's within the household, the individual's responsibility of what material they put in what bin. So we will sympathetically talk to individuals and try and provide any support that we can, but there's not a great deal of influence or kind of control that we have within the household of what people actually put in their bins. It's something that fortunately we don't face very often. And I think it's probably testament to the great support that people have individually within their households. If you think about people, how would they deal with their shopping? How would they deal with paying bills and things of that nature? I think it just shows that people generally have a good network of support from carers and volunteers and family members that help with this kind of thing. So it's not something that we kind of find very often, so which is probably a good thing. But where we do have any kind of issues, then we'll happily talk to people. But it's really difficult to actually influence this. Thank you.
Fine, thank you. Anyone else? Yep. Yep, Jackie and then Phil.
It's just very quick. Just to be clear, I wasn't talking about physical blindness. It was about conceptual blindness. But I think it's really good that you picked up on that. I never thought of that. Really good. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the report. I think these reports are really helpful, I've got to say, in seeing where we are, almost instantly seeing where we're achieving what we're trying to achieve and where we're not actually meeting the targets. So I do well, and seeing the action points in there. Obviously, we're going to look at the where we're not achieving, and obviously the first early ones on page 35 and beyond is school aspirations. For me, I've got to say, when you see the percentage of schools that are judged good or outstanding, we're not quite achieving it, and the percentage of pupils in outstanding or good schools, we're not quite there yet. I've got to say, for me, it raises questions on the way the academy system is working or not working. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, in a few years' time, I think whoever's in government, whichever side is in government, are going to come out with an innovative idea, and they're going to get local authorities to run schools. Thank you.
Right. Thank you for that. Okay. Hugo.
Thank you. It was just one of the comments that the waste chap came up and was speaking on in terms of how they go round to schools to educate people at schools on recycling. When you look at sort of one of the things in here is enabling everyone to enjoy life to the full. If waste can go round and educate people on recycling, why can't public health go round and educate people on eating properly and stopping obesity, which is far greater of an issue? Thank you.
Yep, I think that's outside our remit, but I can understand where you're coming from. Okay. Anyone else? No? Yep, if we go to page 11, the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board is invited to consider the attached report and determine whether the board supports the recommendations the executive has set out in the report. Agree any additional comments, well, they've been captured. Review and comment on the performance information that is within the remit of the board, and to review and agree the 23-24 performance indicators as shown in Appendix B. So they're the things that we were asked to do, and I think we've done them. So agreeing that the arguments that have been put forward at this meeting have been captured by our team, I'll be going to the executive to report that. So is all of that acceptable? And if so, can you indicate, please? Fine, thank you. Anyone against? No. Any abstentions? No. Swirl system redesign. Project update. This item provides an update to the delivery of new business world system which went live on the 6th of April. So we're going to monitor it. The people that are going to be speaking to us, Louisa, over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so the implementation phase completed and the system formally went live on the 6th of April. In the lead up to go live, a number of measures and controls were in place and reviewed to ensure that key activities were completed on time, including the transfer of data, completion of guidance material, delivery of training, and business readiness for the change. Following go live, we held a number of daily meetings across all areas to monitor the processes and the performance of the system, and to ensure that any teething issues were identified and addressed as quickly as possible. The implementation has overall been a success, with supplier payments being made, income being received, and staff being paid on schedule as planned with no significant issues. Processes continue to be reviewed weekly to highlight and address any key areas. Some examples of this that we've experienced are where system users are not always completing forms fully or on time. An example of that is where some users were selecting the wrong period, so selecting to put expenses in for April 2024 rather than April 2023. To address these sorts of things, we do additional communications and guidance was sent out to stop this, followed by an additional system control being applied to prevent operators being able to select future periods. Some off-system processes for payroll and their interaction with forms on the new system are currently being reviewed with Serco and HR to identify any areas causing delay to the processing of forms. Options are being considered to ensure that the most efficient working practices are in place while still adopting the system standard processes. Moving on to reports, the system went live with a standard suite of reports, as well as some Lincolnshire specific reports identified at the start of the project. Other reports identified throughout the project as being required are still in development. This is being monitored with testing taking place and releases of reports into live once they are fully signed off. Data quality following all of the data cleanse and migration work will continue to be monitored now as part of business as usual by service leads and the corporate performance team to maintain and report on the integrity of our data. In respect to future developments to the system, a full governance and development structure is now in place to ensure continuous developments are made and with the right controls and priorities in place. The new system has delivered a range of benefits, including system alerts to help ensure appropriate actions are taken in a timely manner. Staff are able to record all annual leave on Business World now with clear balances shown, removing the need to duplicate recording. And we now have commitment accounting incorporated as standard, which helps ensure budgetary control as amounts committed against purchase orders are shown for budget monitoring and forecasting. Project close down is underway with handovers into service areas for business as usual items now taking place. And feedback is being gathered through a survey and individual meetings, and this will be collated along with other lessons learned gathered throughout the project and shared with the Corporate Project Management Office for shared learning for future projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, OSMB, what do you want to ask Louisa about?
Councillor Brockman, Chairman.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jackie.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the report. My question is right at the beginning of the report, actually, although there is a comment later in the report which ties in, and it's about the paying of suppliers. The way it's worded here, it does indicate that there was quite a heavy problem about a backlog in paying suppliers, and that kind of worries me because, yeah, as we know, cash flow for suppliers, especially in the current markets, can make or break businesses. So I have two questions. One is there any evidence of serious detriment to any of our suppliers as a result of this? And in the bottom of the page, it talks about the data load completed by Hoopla on the evening of the 30th of May, reducing the background, and the issue has now become more manageable and continues to be monitored. It still feels quite serious so could you clarify that for me? And I noticed later in the report, there's a lot of really good stuff I can see that there's a lot of huge positives here, but it does say overall it's been a success. And so I'm homing in on this little bit. So it's detriment to suppliers. And when we're talking about manageable, what are we actually talking about here? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I can actually confirm that those sort of backlogs that were experienced are now back to normal business as usual levels, so that has been resolved. So we've seen that return to normal, which is great. The suppliers were paid in time according to the payment terms, so although there was a backlog, we were still able to pay in accordance to the payment terms. It was just that there was higher volumes than normal for the team to process, so there were a number of days behind where there would normally be only sort of 2 days behind, but we still managed to process the vast majority within the payment terms.
Anybody else? I don't know if it's linked, but if we look at page 75, the second paragraph from the end, bank holidays in April, May have affected processing times with deadlines often earlier in the month, and then it goes on to talk about problems. I mean, there's two issues. The first is that bank holidays in April, May always occur, and secondly, every local authority in the country has to face the same issue. And it just sounds as though that this is causing us, because you're bringing it at least openly to our attention, as a bit of a problem.
Thank you. It was just in relation to the shutdown of the system. So we did have to shut down for a 2-week period to transfer over to the new system. So it was the impact of the bank holidays on top of the 2-week shutdown period as well, which was why it was a bit more of a unique circumstance. And therefore we just wanted to work closely with all operators to ensure to lessen that impact, which did lead to some of those early backlogs.
So it's not endemic to April, May?
No. So as you rightly say, there are always those sort of Easter holidays and bank holidays around that time, but the operators around payroll and HR are used to that. But because of the large data transfer and cut over from one system to another, we had a 2-week closure.
Yeah, and then just one other question. It goes on to talk about, your report goes on to talk about, historically there have been issues across the council and schools in the late submission of forms, which is a practice the council, schools and Serco need to continue to work on and embed good practice. How is that going? And I just can't help but think that if there's a practice in place, I just wonder why the staff out there in our schools are not doing the business, as it were.
So we have, as part of the system implementation, made some improvements to forms so that it does actually do some of the validation for them and have some mandatory fields to allow for smarter forms. So we are already seeing some improvement on that, and we'll continue to work with schools' business officers to feed in and update any guidance to keep enhancing that going forward, but we will be monitoring it.
Okay. Can you tell us very briefly, there's been improvement from what to what? Where did we start with and where are we now in percentages?
I don't have those figures with me today, but we can look into that for you if you'd like.
Because there's a big difference between being on 10% and increasing to 15% and being on 80% and increasing to 85%. And I just wonder how bad it was.
Yeah, sorry, I don't have that in front of me, but we could...
If you circulate it to members, then that would be fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, anybody else want to raise anything on Business World System Redesign Projects Update? No? Okay. So we're here to... sorry, it's... Yeah, and I've got that here. Okay, thanks. So... I propose that the board has reviewed the report and has been assured on the implementation of a new Business World system. Can you please raise your hand if you agree? Thank you. Anybody disagree? Anybody not wanting to vote? Abstaining? No? Okay, that's carried then. Thank you. Right. This I review of financial performance. Yeah, we're on 10, aren't we? Yeah. Review of financial performance. Actions required by the board are to consider the attached report and agree any additional comments to be passed on to the executive in relation to this item. Michelle.
Thank you very much, Chair. So the executive report starts at page 99 of your pack, and Scrutiny being asked to review this ahead of it going to exec on the 4th of July and then on to council in September, seeking approval to make changes to the budgets in year. The report's covering the financial year April 22 to March 23, and as we know, this period of time has been particularly challenging in terms of rising costs and the inflationary impacts of cost of services that we provide. We did anticipate some volatility when we set the budget for 22-23, and the council made the decision to increase our corporate contingency, which was 3 million at the time, but we raised that to 6.5 million. Council also decided to add some of the carry forward from the previous year into that contingency, raising it to 8.8 million. And I can say that all of that contingency was used to offset some of those pressures that came through in the year, predominantly around the pay awards that was agreed, that hadn't been fully budgeted for, and the additional costs, particularly around additional travel, educational travel budget that was particularly put under pressure. So in terms of our revenue budget, Table C on page 109 gives a service breakdown, and the paragraphs 122 to 130 provide some of the main variances of the service budgets. The service budget underspend was 4.1 million, and other budgets an underspend of 1.3 million. But the main overall position was an underspend of 12.7 million, with the majority of that being from additional funding that we hadn't planned for. So we received some additional Section 31 grants from government around our business rates measures that they'd put in place. So the billing authorities hadn't collected business rates that they were expecting, and we got a grant directly from government for that. We'd reported a 1.6 million underspend in Q3. And the main variance was around that funding, and also about the fact that we've been able to use the contingency to offset the forecast overspend in place around the travel budget for schools. So the other variances were mainly in line with what we'd reported in Q3 around the service budgets. So the other thing that's in the report is around the capital budget. So capital on page 113, Table D, so shows a summary position against budget of a net underspend of 49 million. We'd reported the underspend in Q3 of the capital contingency budget, which was underspent by 19 million. But there were some other variances in there that were larger, mainly around the Grantham Southern Relief Road and one or two of the other major projects. These aren't underspends in the sense that they are project underspends, they are timing slippages. Members will be aware that there's been some technical issues on Grantham Southern Relief Road, which has pushed back the timing of that project a little. And some of that underspend was offset by an overspend on the highways maintenance programme. So the highways team over-programme the maintenance works for highways to contend with any bad weather that might interrupt their programme. They over-delivered that programme because that bad weather didn't happen. So they are showing an overspend on the highways asset protection budget of 11.6 million, which will be carried forward into the new year. So all of the variances on the capital budgets will be carried forward. And obviously any changes to that in terms of the capital project delivery, the capital contingency will be brought back to members to discuss any changes in the capital programme. So the other area that's in the report is the development fund. So the report updates on allocated areas of investments that have been given through this reserve. As part of the budget setting in February, a number of reserves were released into the development fund, and that was 8.7 million at the time. The report sets out in 1.45, para 1.45, details of how this addition to the reserve is planned to be utilised, with 7 million invested in local highway schemes, the remainder in highways in terms of lines and signs, also in public rights of way and some skills development. So that's set out in the report as well. The report also gives information on the planned use of the underspend in the revenue budget. So page 118 sets out table E, which gives details of the total revenue underspend that I spoke about of 12.7 million. Services, as part of our financial regs, services get to carry 1% of that forward. The report is proposing that we don't carry forward the small overspend on place and fire and rescue, and that will leave a balance of 10 million, just 10 million, that we are proposing to add to the development fund reserve to deal with emerging priorities coming through the year. So I'm happy to take any questions on that. That was a very quick run through. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Good report. Thank you. Questions? Right. Nobody. Okay. It's a sound report in the sense that it's good news. No one the spending. What would you say is that we've learned from this? Sorry, the financial year that's just ended. That will be of relevance to the current one. In other words, have you seen any trends in expenditure or government announcements that means that we will maybe have to look at our current budget in a different light?
So the inflation impact continues to be a concern. The education travel budget continues to be a concern, and that's why we've kept that contingency at that level. And obviously, as part of budget setting, we added a new contingency specifically around education travel. I haven't seen any kind of government moves to try and change the regulations around that and the statutory requirements, so that will continue to be a pressure for us. In terms of government funding, the government kind of indicated that our budgets for 24/5, so the spending review period, would probably remain fairly static. They've not really got any appetite at the moment for dealing with things like fair funding review, but they have indicated that from 25/6 onwards, then that there might be periods of putting those budgets under pressure and trying to, deal with the financial position that the central government finds itself in. So we are trying to scenario plan about what that might look like for future years, and we'll bring that back to members. We're working through that over the summer to bring that back to members as part of the process for setting the budgets going forward.
You mentioned just then the fairer funding review. Is that in the long grass at the moment?
I think it's safe to say it's been put beyond the current government period. So it won't be something I think they're looking at ahead of any general election.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Andrew might have a view on that, but that's certainly the indication we've got through our professional bodies.
Do you want to say anything?
Well, I can add if you want to a bit of extra colour, Chairman. So I think I've said it it's 3 years in a row now where we've said we've had it's felt like a year like no other, and I think that probably that phrase is wearing thin now. We are in an environment where there are shocks, economic shocks. I think looking forward, I think the big concern for me professionally for this council's budget is what that environment looks like post 25-26. Clearly the spending review that was undertaken last autumn was predicated on unprotected departments, of which local government is one, potentially facing funding reductions of 3.2%. That was prior to the current economic challenges that are being faced around inflation and more latterly interest rates, which would have an impact on government borrowing, ergo potentially extending the size of that gap. So it's something that we need to look at and plan carefully for going forward. That's the main point I'd like to make. But yeah, as Michelle says, the fair funding review looks like it's not going to come anytime soon, is what we're hearing.
Martin, you wanted to say something.
Just to add to what's been said, obviously I suppose that a lot of the pressures have been covered by a contingency, but of course that will need then to be built into next year's base budget. So that is a pressure there. I mean, I think in answer to your question, I think the government is steady as she goes in terms of financing local government. So there will be no major changes. I think it's a nice frustration, which is quite frustrating when you set the budget and then suddenly, just after you set the budget, £5 or £6 million suddenly appears, which a nice problem to have, but it'd be nice to have known that before we set our budget. So I think it's not just the fair funding, there's issues of the adult care reforms, there's the children's massive problems with particularly special educational needs across the whole country, of which I have to say, congratulate Children's Services. We are managing, and adults with their issues, we are managing those two massive problems very well in this council, which means that's why we're in a relatively strong place. But I think I think a lot of these decisions will wait for the new government, whatever that looks like. But I think in the long term, the new government, a lot of the savings, whoever it is, will, I think, have to start talking seriously about savings, and no doubt local government will be part of that regime. So I think short term, okay, longer term, still a worry. But and obviously the recommendation is fairly neutral, and then it will be up really to the council in September to actually decide what it wants to do with this underspend. But at the moment it's parked in development funding, just to put it there for further consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I was just going to say, with all due respect to the Conservatives, it does seem as though the government is seeing out its time at the moment. Now that can be taken in two ways: steady as you go, or we're not coming back. So, okay. But it just seems that from.
To be fair, all organisations that you don't want to take tough decisions just before you're making decisions just in the face of elections is probably. I think any organisation is probably wary of doing that, unless it's good news all round. But I don't think the government's got the financial flexibility for good news all round, as we well know.
Thanks, Martin. Jackie.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if I could just ask a question to aid my understanding, please. Paragraph 1.8. It talks about the underspend, the council achieving an overall underspend of 12.749 million. And then it explained how it has been aided with two sums, otherwise it would have been reduced. What I don't understand is if the money hasn't been spent, it hasn't been spent regardless of where it is, of which pot it's in. Surely it's still part of the underspend. So why does moving it from one place to another affect the total? So I'm sure it's a numpty question, but I need to ask it. Thank you.
No, so it's a perfectly sensible question. So when we set the budget, we obviously look at the pressures overall and how we deal with our funding overall. We make a decision around council tax and what's needed to fund our services. Had we not put that additional money into contingency, it would have been allocated elsewhere when we set the budgets, and then it would not have been available when we got the additional cost of the pay award, when we got the additional inflation on education travel. So it is likely that we wouldn't have been in such a good position had we not made that decision at that point when we was balancing the overall budget, and it would have been spent on other things because it wouldn't have been there for that purpose.
Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the reports. I just wonder, colleagues will be. I'm just looking forward to next year and beyond. And last year, colleagues, I'm sure will remember, Michael Gove, the government minister at the time, promised a 2-year settlement at least for the current year. Obviously, that was before the mini budget, and so we only got a 1 year for this year. But given that the election is expected next year, or general election next year, and in view of the comments that have already been made, are we expecting another 1 year settlement yet again?
So I think, sorry, do you want me to carry? Do you want to carry on? I'll carry on. So when we were provided with the settlement for 23-4, the government set out some really clear indications of what it would provide for 24-5, and nothing beyond then other than potential austerity and savings measures. So when we get to our settlement for 24-5, which will be likely to be December time this year, it will be, I'm fairly certain, just a 1 year settlement, and then we enter into a new spending review period, which will probably be the remit of the new government. Yep.
Okay, anyone else wishes to speak? Yeah, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very brief. It's just to pay tribute to all the officers who have worked on this and everything else.
in the council throughout the year, because it's been a very, very hard 3 years for many reasons in local government. So just thank you very much, and I'm quite happy to move the recommendations, Chairman.
That's good, because that's just what we're going to do. Can I have a proposer and a seconder to support the recommendations? Okay. Essentially, the recommendations to the executive are set out on pages 99 to 100 of the agenda pack. So if you want to support those, can you raise your hand, please? Anyone against? Abstentions? Nil? Thank you. Thanks for that. Okay. Item 11. Excuse me. Treasury Management Annual Report. This report sets out the annual report on the county's treasury management activities, and we are required to review and endorse the Treasury Management Annual Report. Okay. Report will be presented by Sue Maycock.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. This is the Treasury Management Annual Report for 2022-23, which sets out what happened in the year and then compares that to the strategy we set out at the beginning of 2022-23. There's quite a lot of detail in the report and appendices as well, but I'm just going to take you through some of the key points which are set out in section 5, the summary, which is on page 193 of the pack. And then when I've finished, we'll hand over to Robert Baxter from Link Asset Services. He's joining us virtually, and he'll be able to give a commentary on Link's view of our performance in the year. So starting with those key points, first of all, the bank base rate was increased 8 times in 2022-23, and it hit 4.25% at the end of the year. And in fact, it's now at 5%, so it's moved again since the end of the year. And this has caused both short-term and long-term interest rates to increase in line with that rapid rise in the bank rate. Our investment balances, so the cash we've had available to invest in 2022-23, is less than it was the previous year, around £75 million less, so the average was £281 million. And mainly this was because we've used our internal cash to fund capital expenditure in the year, because we haven't taken any further external borrowing. The investment return on those cash balances increased to £3.5 million, and that's despite having lower cash balances, and this is because of the rapid increase in market interest rates. In the previous year, it was only £150,000. We underperformed against the benchmark set for this for our risk level. That's the SONIA benchmark. And that's because that benchmark moves as soon as interest rates move, whereas we have to obviously wait for our investments to mature, and there's a bit of a time lag. We're part of a benchmarking group, and we have outperformed our benchmarking partners, and the information about that is shown on the table on page 187. We did not take any short-term borrowing during the year because we didn't need to, and all of our prudential limits set at the start of the year have been adhered to. We haven't had any breaches in the year. Capital expenditure underspent in 2022-23, so the borrowing requirement that we had reduced as a result of that. And our capital financing requirement has been met both by external borrowing and internal borrowing using our own cash. So the proportion of that that's externally borrowed is about 70%, and our internal borrowing represents about 30%. In the year, the underspend that we had on capital financing charges was used to make a voluntary revenue provision in addition to the minimum revenue provision that we have to make, and that's the second year running that we've done that. So our total voluntary revenue provision now stands at just over 35 million, and we can use that to offset our minimum revenue provision charges in future years if we need to do that to help balance the budget. So as I said, no external borrowing was taken during the year, and we did repay some of our debt, so we've slightly reduced our average interest rate there. And the level of cash that we've had and the amount of internal borrowing is all in line with the strategy we set out at the beginning of the year and our debt liability benchmark prudential indicator for the year. So they're the main points. I think I'll hand over to Robert now. Robert Baxter.
Robert, do you want to add points to that?
I will indeed. Morning, everybody. Hope you can hear me okay.
Sound.
Excellent. So in terms of providing some independent comments on the report, I think it's worth noting in terms of the bank rate and the changes that we saw throughout the year. So on setting the council's strategy before the start of the financial year, base rates had increased from 0.1% to 0.75%. And the forecast at the time was that the rates would end the year at 1.25%. Now, obviously, that was quite significantly different to what we expected, and rates did end the year at 4.25%. Sue had mentioned that rates had already increased, and currently the forecast for bank rate is to increase to about 5.5% this year before starting to be reduced at the end of the year, back down to 5.25. So just in context, that's where we were at the start of the year, and that's what actually happened in terms of those interest rates. In terms of the council, it's maintained an internally borrowed position historically. This has increased to around 30% currently. In terms of a percentage, that's around our average rate in terms of our client base, and certainly in line with other county councils. It's a sensible policy based on what's currently happening, because obviously borrowing rates have increased, so it makes sense not to incur that external borrowing until those rates start to come back down again. And that will be in a couple of years or so. So in terms of borrowing, no external borrowing was taking place throughout the year based on that scenario. Investment balances dropped as a consequence of that strategy. And again, that made sense based on the fact that we would defer external borrowing until that point in time when rates come back down again. In terms of interest rates, as I said, they increased dramatically. So the council's return on those interests or investments increased with that return increase. However, performance in section 3.14 states that it was slightly below. That's due to a new benchmark that was introduced in the year, and there's a time lag between the council's investments maturing and then picking up and getting that new rate of return. I think more importantly is the table at 3.18%, which compares the council's performance against other county councils, and that shows that the council has performed extremely well in that backdrop. So overall, I think the council has had a very good performance in the year, and that has been against an extremely challenging financial backdrop. So that's my comments.
That's good, and it's they're all positives. Sorry, you've gone. You can't do a runner that quickly. Okay.
I'm still here.
But not visible. Okay, fine.
Oh, I am here.
So it's out to members. Eddie, you usually have a comment on this particular. I'm not putting you under pressure because there's other people want. But if you want to make a comment, you'd be more than welcome.
Well, my long-standing comments, Chairman, have always been about the forecast on interest rates. But this time, I'm completely baffled because I've been saying for donkey's years, the forecast was always high, but it always stayed around about almost 0%. And this time, the forecast was something around about 0.75 a little while ago, and now it's 5%. So it's understandable that you have to have high interest rates to try and keep inflation down, and of course it's going up, as was commented on there, probably 5.5% before it perhaps starts to come down again. And it will do, but it'll only depend on inflation. And I think inflation is the key to all. I noticed the Eurozone has actually dropped from just 7% down to, I can't remember the exact figure, 6.3, I think. But we are suffering really badly from the shortage of food supplies because of perhaps the pandemic, but more so, I think, because of Ukraine and the war and the knock-on effect that all this has on our economy. I still think we'll come out of it smiling. I'm quite hopeful. I do follow the financial markets quite a lot. I have to, obviously, as chairman of pensions, but I don't see any doom and gloom. It hurts people on the mortgage side. It hurts people on borrowing generally. it benefits people who are savers, of course. So there's always another side to the coin on financial services it hurts some people and doesn't hurt others. In fact, benefits a lot of people who are relying on their savings, especially in, I'm sorry for using the phrase, this so-called crisis. I don't believe it's a crisis, personally. If you talk about when I was a youngster, that was what poor really meant. And I don't want to go into personal details, but I don't see us as badly off as everybody's making out. Perhaps I'm wrong, and there are people struggling, of course there are. But if you go back to the 50s, it was really tough. And I think we'll pull through because we're British, and I'm quite happy the way things are going. Although, I don't think there's a risk to the council here. I think we're very prudent, we're very sensible in what we do, and yeah, I've read the report, and I'm quite happy with the recommendation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Eddie. Switch a generation or two. Can we go to Adam?
Yes, the opposite end. And my mortgage is going to jump in November. Yes, so I welcome the report, and I think the sensible, prudent way of doing it is internal borrowing. It's been mentioned it's at 30%. Obviously, going forward, because interest rates will continue to go up till the end of the year, has been mentioned. So I'm just wondering, what's the maximum that internal borrowing could get to within the constraints of what we've got in reserves? Thank you.
Okay, can we pick that up?
Yeah, well, we have the prudential indicator, which is that debt liability benchmark, and that basically means we'll continue to internally borrow until we reach the minimum level of cash that we want to hold, which is about £100 million. I'm afraid I don't know what percentage that would equate to, though, in terms of internal borrowing, but at that point then we would want to look to borrow.
Okay, anybody else? Yeah, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 points with your indulgence. I'd like to draw members' attention to point 415 in the report. Could officers give me a bit of background on the LOBO debt to BAE Systems Pension Fund and what was the purpose of that debt? Secondly, very shortly after that, on point 419, it says the council will undertake external borrowing. Could officers give, not the coming year, but the following year after, could officers give a bit more detail on how this will be done, especially as we've already had the conversation around interest rates and how far they've risen, and obviously the higher they are, the more borrowing costs. And finally, and this is a question for our guests from Link Assets Services, and it's sort of a learning question for myself. Could he explain to me how a bank in Germany has had their ratings increased, yet Germany is officially in recession, yet Barclays, for example, has had its rating downgraded, yet we are not in recession technically in the United Kingdom? Thank you, Chairman.
Shall I start with those ones? The LOBO debt, that's a lender option, borrower option loan, was taken some years ago. So it would have been taken just as part of borrowing to support the capital programme. And although that was before my time here, that it would have been because it would have been at a good rate. And in that kind of thing, we would have sought advice from Link Asset Services at the time to make sure that that was the right type of loan to take. The question around when we're going to take further borrowing. So Karen Tong, the Treasury Manager, she has a long-term cash flow forecast, which is updated continuously. So what she'll be doing is looking ahead to see when we're likely to get down to that minimum level of £100 million worth of cash and trying to predict when we're going to need to start borrowing. So that may change as we get closer. It depends on the performance of the capital programme between now and then. But as we start to get closer, then she will start to engage with Link, and she'll let them know, right, at this point in time, we're expecting to be looking to borrow. So can you start advising us on timings and rates? And that's what they usually do, and we engage with them to make sure we get the best deal we can. I'm afraid I can't remember, there was another question for me, and I've lost that one.
The third question was around, was actually for our guest from Link Assets, and it's a learning question for myself, because in the report, a bank in Germany, and I can't remember the name, so I do apologise for for that omission, I should have put it in my notes, has had its ratings increased, yet the country is actually in recession from memory, yet Barclays, for example, has had its rating decreased, yet we are not in recession. So it's just how that works and how that functions.
Hello. In terms of bank ratings, so obviously they are dependent on a number of factors. So not only what is happening in the country and the sovereign rating of that country, but also based on what's happened for that particular bank. So in terms of the German bank, I don't know the details behind it, but obviously if they have increased their ratings, it's to do with a specific point related to that bank itself, not only just related to Germany as a country. And in terms of Barclays as well, the rating changes will be based on specific factors relating to that individual bank. So it could be that that bank's particular, performance was due to increase and improve over the coming quarters, and that obviously impacted on the rating for that particular bank. And the rating agencies will then factor that within their rating changes, if you like, for the forecast and the future for that bank itself. So it can be for a number of factors, and just because a particular country is experiencing, recession like Germany at the moment, banks can still go up and down in terms of credit ratings based on their own individual aspects of their individual performance, if that makes sense.
It does, thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else want to speak on this item 11? Okay, well, the board is invited to review and endorse the Treasury Management Annual Report for 2022 and 2023. Those who agree to endorse the Treasury Management Report, please show. Yeah. Any objection? Sorry, any voting against? No. No abstentions. Fine, that's carried then. Lovely. Thanks. Yep. So we move on to item 12, which is the Property Services Recommissioning. We are being asked as an Overview and Scrutiny Management Board to consider a report on Property Services Recommissioning, which is due to be considered by the Executive on the 4th of July. The views of the board will be reported to the Executive as part of its consideration.
The report's going to be presented by Jane.
Right. Can't read that. Jane
Selby Warrington.
Jane Selby Warrington. Yep. Are you?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah,
it's me again.
Hello. Can't see your sign.
Just before I kick off with a bit of a summary of the report, just want to introduce a number of colleagues of mine. So Andy Fenn is our Head of Facilities Management, Dave Pennington, our Head of Property Development, and Dan Charlesworth, our Commercial Manager. And just to say, this paper wouldn't have been possible without these guys behind me. So if there's any technical questions after, they're the guys you need to speak to. Right. So yeah, just a brief summary really, Chair, in terms of the big report that we've put forward. So in terms of us as a corporate property function, we do recognise that now we've adopted a corporate landlord approach to the management of our assets, there are things we do need to do differently. For example, we know that we require a stronger, intelligent client team to ensure that we have the best source of technical in-house experience to ensure value for money and the highest quality of service. In addition, we also recognise that there are other changes that we need to make in terms of the responsiveness of some of our services as well, with regard to some of our sort of maintenance jobs. And sometimes, obviously, some of those maintenance jobs can be quite costly as well. So what we're looking at is the reprocurement of the property services contract to really strengthen the current property services offer. And we believe that the changes that we set out in the report today will do just that. So I'll just give a quick overview of the changes. So the first one is we are proposing to move away from that one overarching contract that's currently in place. So at the moment, we contract out to Vinci, our main contractor, who then subcontract to Kia. And there's a number of areas that they look after on our behalf. They are estate and data, facilities management, and elements of property development. As you can imagine, a contract of this sort of size can be quite cumbersome, can be quite costly, and quite a burden to administer as well. So what we're recommending is that we move away from one contract and have one contract for FM, another one for property development, and we are proposing to insource the estates and data team. So taking each area in turn, I'll just provide a little bit more detail, but I do appreciate there is a lot of detail in the report. So with regard to our facilities management area, this will largely remain outsourced with the exception of a couple of teams. So we're proposing to bring in the energy and environmental services, which are 2 full-time employees, and we believe that they can add rigour and robustness around the work that we're doing with the Green Agenda and the Green Master Plan. In addition, compliance is really important to us as a council, and we're talking about compliance in terms of health and safety of our property assets and the health and safety of those that occupy our property assets. So we're really focusing in on this area. To that effect, we're looking at bringing in 2 full-time employees in terms of asbestos management. We've also reviewed our construction design management work, which is a key role in terms of any property-related work that we do. And this will remain outsourced, but it will be independent to the main FM contractor. Furthermore, in order to add further robustness to compliance, we are looking at the creation of 3 internal posts. The first one is around adding robustness to our fire compliance. The second one, our Legionella compliance. And then the third one is a minor works manager. Now, the minor works manager will oversee those small works and refurbishment projects and hopefully add a bit more robustness in terms of responsiveness. So moving on from FM, we now look at property development. And when we talk about property development, they're our project-related works, such as SEND provision, extra care provision, and the new children's secure home. What we're looking to do there is to insource a technical team of professionals to add that technical expertise, oversight, and assurance in terms of our property-related work. This team will work alongside a delivery partner via a professional services contract, and it will equate to the insourcing of 7 full-time employees. We're looking at 2 quantity surveyors, 2 clerk of works, and 3 technical project managers. We do believe that changing the model will equate to savings of circa £350,000. However, further savings and cost avoidance will be likely, as we will be in a position to be able to robustly challenge the delivery partner in all that they do. And the third part is our estates and data team. So at the moment, they're outsourced via the Kia contractor. Our estate and data team are responsible for the transactional side of property services, so acquisitions, disposals, lease management, and valuations. We believe by bringing in the estates and property data team, it will add synergy in terms of the property services offer and make us stronger in terms of delivery. There will be a nominal saving achieved if we do bring in estates and the property data team. And I think that's in the report at around £34,000. But I will say the benefits in terms of service offer will be far-reaching in terms of those synergies that bringing the estates team in will create. So overall, to conclude, our proposal is to insource our estate and data, energy and environment team, asbestos management and professional services. This equates to 19 full-time employees of a total of 146 that are currently outsourced through the current contract. And we're looking to generate savings of around £380,000. In addition, we're also looking at the creation of 3 new posts to strengthen that intelligent client team and compliance element. And they will be within Fire, Legionella and the Minor Works Manager. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So, who wants to go first?
I've got a number of questions.
Okay, Tom, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. You'll be relieved to know they are brief, but there are 5 of them, with your permission. Our office is confident they will have sufficient number of qualified people in respect to the corporate property team and the client team to take over the responsibilities of our current contractors before the new arrangements come into effect. Secondly, I note the review comments about the danger of having only one qualified officer in the corporate property team. Could officers go into a bit of background and help the board understand why this approach was previously deemed acceptable and why it happened? Thirdly, will there be any lessons learned action being taken when the newly qualified officers are in place around ensuring that LCC was not overcharged for services on the previous contract? Fourth, are officers confident this new delivery model is sustainable long term? And finally, Chairman, what protections from personal liability will our officers have with respect to their duties around asbestos, Legionella and fire regulations? Thank you, Chairman.
Right, you may need to go through them again because they... let's start from the beginning with the first question and the first answer. Thank you.
Is that to check that I've been listening, Chair? I think the first question, forgive me, Councillor Smith, was around the qualified team. Can you just repeat that one for me, just to make sure that I hit the mark for you?
Of course I can. The question was, are officers confident they will have sufficient number of qualified people with respect to the corporate property team and the client team to take over the responsibilities of our current contractors in the current arrangements before the new contract comes into effect?
I would like to say, Councillor Smith, thank you for the question. I think they're really well thought out. I think, to be honest, at the moment, across the intelligent client, across the client team and Vinci Kia, I think for me there are enough qualified staff there. I feel, if I'm honest, they're not all in the right place, if that makes sense. So at the moment, within our estates and data team, we have qualified chartered surveyors across there, but they are across with Kia. I think part of bringing those in is to strengthen our intelligent client team. So those chartered surveyors will sit with us, and it will provide obviously those synergies between the rest of the property services team, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think there's enough qualified people. They're just not always in the right place, if that makes sense. Is that okay?
Yep. Question 2.
I note the review comments about the danger of having, and goes into corporate property, one qualified officers. Could you sort of give a bit of background as to why that's happened and why at the time it was deemed the right approach?
Yeah, I think that one qualified officer actually refers to myself in terms of being a chartered surveyor. So again, across the client team, I am the only obviously chartered surveyor, but we have got other chartered surveyors within the contract that obviously we rely on to sign off on valuations, acquisitions and disposals. I think, to be honest, Councillor Smith, there's not really a right and wrong way to look at this. I think it's just about us making our team more robust with more sort of technical acumen and experience so that we can provide the best service for the property on the whole.
Question 3.
Thank you. Thirdly, will any, to use a military term, lessons learned action be taken around previous contracts? Because I know in the report it mentions around the potential of being overcharged for services.
Yeah, again, a good question, Councillor Smith. In terms of that, I think, to be honest, in terms of pulling together this report, there has been a lot of background information and work that's gone on behind the scenes. You know, thanks to these 3 gentlemen behind me, really, before I started here 6 months ago. I think we'd already started that lessons learned process, if I'm honest, and that helped us to formulate this direction of travel, which is in the paper today. But we will continue on with that journey because it is really important in terms of continuous improvement for us as a property service.
Thank you. The fourth question, Chairman, is are you confident that long term this delivery model is sustainable? Because I know now we have a very large programme, but obviously that comes in peaks and troughs. So long term, is it sustainable for the council to keep this model?
Yeah, I think based on the direction of travel in terms of the property services offer and the fact that we have adopted a corporate landlord approach to the management of our assets. So in effect, All property assets are now managed within the corporate centre through corporate property. That in itself has been a journey, and it does continue to be a journey that obviously we're on. Therefore, I think looking at the future direction of where we're going, this absolutely is the right model that we're adopting. We've also looked out to the market as well at other local authorities that have similar sort of property services contracts, and it does seem to replicate and reflect what others are doing as well. So yeah, I'm pretty confident this is the way forward, Councillor Smith.
And you'll be relieved. Final question. What protections from personal liability will our officers have in respect of their duties around asbestos, Legionella and the new fire regs? Because I know they're basically personally liable, from how I've read the report, for the correct procedures being followed.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's the purpose of the requirements within this report and the recommendations to bring in the asbestos, Legionella and fire side. What it's not doing is not taking away the work or all the work that the contractor would be doing. What it is doing is it's actually giving us a more robust management setup to be able to ensure that we're covering those areas. In respect of your first question as well, Councillor, you asked about the responsibilities, taking responsibilities off the contractor. That's an interesting one, because obviously from a legislation point of view, compliance, the contractor isn't responsible. We are always responsible. We can get a contractor to do the work for us, but we cannot hand that responsibility to a contractor. And I think at the moment, as you quite rightly say, we've got quite a big portfolio now, and we've brought in all the properties from corporate landlord for corporate landlord. And what we need to do is be able to dig deeper into what the contractors are doing. I've given examples within the report of where that has not happened elsewhere, and the bodies have been prosecuted rather than the contractors, because they've had things in place but they haven't checked that it's been done right and been done to the correct standards. And that's what this would actually do. So to answer your question directly, it gives us a lot more protection for officers and for the council to ensure that we're fulfilling our statutory duties.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Well, yeah, certainly Tom's done the heavy lifting for us in relation to the questions. Martin.
It is an interesting scenario, and I think as has been said, you know, what was deemed appropriate some years ago may not be appropriate now. Now, in particular, I think in legislation is becoming much more prescriptive, both in terms of safety but also in terms of climate change. So we do know that all our buildings will be in future subject to more stringent requirements. But also I think in terms of the corporate landlord, and this has been a very long journey, a very, 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 very long journey. And obviously I was I did portfolios, a property as a portfolio for some years, for 4 years. And it has been more than 4 years actually. It's been a very long, and you know, years ago a lot of the property functions were dealt with by the departments, and I think now it's all coming together. Probably needs a different approach, but also issues, you know, I'm very sure, and I've always been very clear that this should be managed much better, corporate from the centre. Departments should, you know, be able to decide what they want to provide, but it's up to the corporate property team to actually provide that. And I'm very confident that having a corporate property team is the way forward. I think the issues about were we overcharged? Well, we don't know where we're overcharged or not, because it's all about who provides and all the rest of it. We can have views, and we always hear about the overcharging. We never hear about when people make losses on stuff they do. So I think it is the right approach now, but I think also, to be blunt, because we're a thin client, what's known as a thin client operation currently, and obviously we're going to a fatter client, not a particularly fat client, but a fatter client. But that does give challenges in terms of commissioning. So I don't care whether you're thin, fat or obese as a client, your job, unless it's all outsourced now, property functions, I think, over most of the country. You need to make sure when you're commissioning, you're making sure you're asking for the right thing for property, and also making sure then whoever provides the building, the contractor actually delivers what you want at the cost which has been agreed. And I think there is room for improvement there, to be honest, and having a bigger team probably will help that. But I think it's in my mind, it's as much about being a better commissioner of works than we are. Not to say we're bad now, but I think there's always room for improvement. Thank you.
Yep. Hugo.
Thank you, Chairman. Two parts, really. The first part is ensuring that we do not fall into the situation where we let, as our previous agenda, we let a building fall to the point that badly in its repair that it ends up having to be demolished, or actually the cost becomes horrendous. We should make sure that never happens again, and that actually as landlords we make sure that we do keep our properties up to spec. The second part of that is as I go round properties and see them, somebody wants an outside tap, and to get a simple outside tap is £800 because of our current arrangements and systems. That is all wrong. I mean, personally, I think an option of a small in-house team that does jobs to keep it, rather than going out through procurement to get something small done. We need to sort of somehow address that, I feel myself. I mean, I went and saw a leaking tap, and I was like, who's going to fix that? How is that going to do? What is going to be the cost for one little bit of PTFE tape wrapped round the actual plug, the tap, to stop it leaking? And you talk about background, reducing risks and costs to the council. I look at some of our, capital works projects, whatever you call them. They're not necessarily capital works, it's refurbishment. And I could speak about one, but I'm not going to. But the cost in the end was nearly £500,000. And I looked at the work and I thought, honestly, seriously, how did they get that cost? And it's because of the funding that we then pay to the care group to address risk. And it's like, how do we turn the smallest little refurb into a very expensive cost? Personally, that's the bit that we actually need to address. A lot of this, perfectly happy with. Going out for a new build, new design, yep, go out. It's easy to tender. A whole package, job lot, bang. But actually the smaller jobs are the ones that we often do really badly and actually run very expensive. And I don't really get where that sits in here. Personally, I think we need to look at another option of how we deal with that.
I think you've made your point pretty clearly.
Yeah.
So, anybody able to pick that up?
Yeah, I'll pick that up. Yeah, and yeah, you're absolutely right. And to be fair, I think you've sort of mentioned the crux of this paper, really, which is to try and improve the processes that we've got at the moment. Within the paper, obviously, what I've put down for a minor works manager. That is to address a lot of these smaller jobs, because you're absolutely right at the minute. And what we've got to remember is, you know, dependent on the sizes of the job, we've probably got potentially nearly 10,000 jobs a year of these smaller jobs. And that's a lot of jobs to keep on top of. But what it also does is, in the contract as it stands at the moment, and the way it's written in the former contract, it does give the ability to potentially make those jobs a little bit more expensive. So as well as actually changing the way we do it and the team itself, we're actually going towards NEC 4 facilities management contract, which is a specific contract. The one we've got at the moment is NEC 3, which covers both contracts, both the projects side, the larger project side, and the facilities management side. And because it's a contract trying to do two things, it's not perfect for either. What we've now got is NEC have recognised that. They've gone to NEC 4, which we've got. So we've got the professional services contract, which the which the project side will be under, and the actual facilities management contract, which obviously the facilities management and the minor works will be under. So you're absolutely right. At the moment, we've got a contract that potentially works against us in some ways because it's not perfect for either. What we're going to is the more specific contract, which is meant specifically for FM and specifically for projects. That will give us a lot more ability to control these types of costs and to decide on the way that they're done. But as far as the minor works, the very smaller jobs that you were mentioning, that minor works manager, that is their role basically, to make sure that they drive those costs down, but also make sure that we're doing the jobs properly and we've got the quality that we need.
I just want to follow up on, I want to follow up on that. If we take Hugo's example of faulty taps, and I don't know, I'm just picking a figure at random, 1,000 a year across the whole of Lincolnshire, can you just give us some idea how we're going to rationalise that to be more effective?
Yes. So at the moment, I mean, the tap situation there is a repairs and maintenance job, and obviously what we do is we have a repairs and maintenance programme, and we book them in terms of which is the most terms of priority basically. So we do have a time frame on those. As it stands at the moment, we do have an in-house team to some extent, not in-house but in Vinci itself. And they can do some of that work, but it's not enough to do the whole of the work. That will be part of the contract that we put together in relation to the new contract that we're going to be building and designing, will be to look at how those smaller jobs are actually managed and done. They'll all be done as a planned works because they get informed to us via the property service centre, and then they're planned in. At the moment, we have a system called target cost, which is a function of the NEC3. Now, what we're going to is actually priced costs. So we will have, for things like that, we will have a price that we've deemed acceptable in general, and that's what we will pay. So you will have the swings and roundabouts. In some cases, the contractor will win on it. In some cases, they will lose on it. But the idea is it's an acceptable market price. Again, that's very different to what we do at the moment. Problem with the target cost is that there's a target cost which is usually elevated because it's target. That's part of the KPI, which also means that obviously it's within the contractor's interest to actually make that cost higher to start with, so that they keep within it to ensure that they cover the KPIs. That's managed very differently in the NEC4, and without going into too much detail, it does actually give us a lot more control to make sure that they're not able to charge more than they should be doing.
Okay. Right, I'm glad somebody knows what we're talking about. Thank you. Anybody else want to raise anything on this paper? Oh yeah, Councillor Hill. Martin.
Can I just carry on from the tap analogy? Obviously, there is schedule, but also if a tap starts leaking, we would hope that it would be repaired very quickly. I know from personal experience, you know, there's one not a million miles from here which was running for quite some time. Am I correct in saying, and talking about lessons learned and the contract, am I correct in saying that if the council feels that we are not being given best value for money, we have currently the ability to go elsewhere, notwithstanding all the contracts we've signed?
Yes, we do. I mean,
and how often do we do that?
Well, we will use other contractors, or we have used other contractors if we have felt that we're not getting value for money in certain areas or for certain specific jobs. Again, the tap scenario, using that. The issue with that one is the fact that, in the existing contract, there are priority levels set against jobs. And what we've done in the new contract is we've changed those priority levels. And again, the old system lent itself to jobs being given quite a long time scale before they're actually dealt with.
Why is that? Is that in the contract?
That's in the contract, yeah. It's actually specified in the contract. If a job is a P3, let's say, then they have a certain amount of time to actually deal with that job.
But say a leaking tap. Presumably they're not allowed to leave it.
No, I mean a leaking tap would probably maybe a P3, which would maybe give them sort of, you know, a month or so to actually deal with that, which what we've done is we've actually changed the priority levels so that they can't actually stick elongated time scales on that under the new contract. And we can review that as we go along. Again, NEC4 allows us to do that. But yeah, you're absolutely right. We have got the ability to go elsewhere if we need to. There isn't guaranteed volumes under the contract. However, a large proportion of what we do, I mean, we're talking about here where we've either got extended timescales or we've got more expensive jobs. You know, a large proportion of what we do does get done in a reasonable time and at a reasonable price. If we've got, you know, as I say, if we've got 10,000 jobs, a small proportion of that are the ones that will be the issue, and they're the ones that we look at and try and actually do something about, rather than the rest of them that are actually going well, done on time and under price.
I see you getting bored, Chairman. So
No, I was fascinated because the response about the idea of saying the leaking tap, that'll probably be about a month. I'm not sure whether you were being very accurate about it, but the idea of, you know, water draining away out of a tap for 30 days doesn't exactly fill me with confidence. And perhaps as
sorry, can I just say on that? Sorry, you're absolutely right. And what happens is, I mean, we use a leaking tap scenario. You know, it's difficult to sort of be too specific on that. You know, if a tap is running, then obviously it would be given a higher priority. But you know, if it's dripping to us and not too bad, then it would be given a lower priority. As I say, it is a problem with the existing contract. Totally acknowledge that. And that's what this is all about. This is about improving on that.
I'm not a scrutineer, but sorry, we have a contract and we expect officers to do the right thing for us. I know the contract what's improving, but what I don't find acceptable, it's all the contract's fault. You know, I just don't think that's an acceptable statement.
Perhaps some of us can have a discussion outside this meeting about that particular issue. Okay, thanks. Anybody else want to raise anything on this particular paper? No? Okay. Nobody does? Okay. The recommendations, sorry, here we go. Property Services Recommissioning. Yeah, I've got that. I'm just reading it out. The recommendations to the executive are set out on page 223, if you've got that far in the agenda pack. The comments from the board will be captured and forwarded to the executive. I'm proposing that we support the recommendation and to agree to pass on our comments to the executive. Could I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Tom. Those in favour? Those against? Those abstaining? Carried. Thank you. So we move on to page 13, Overview and Scrutiny Management Board Work Programme. This sets out the work programme for 2023 and is for information only. No amendments. Okay, thank you. That concludes the business for today. Thanks for your attendance and your contributions. Okay, thanks.